life, most of the times, is really not perfect. There are a lot of things that actually do escape our control. Like, for instance, you're planning on going out for a photo shoot and all of a sudden it's raining cats and dogs outside. In Portuguese, we call this chover a cântaros. But here's the thing. Life can let you down if only you allow her to do that to you. However, there's one time where life will be ahead of you, and this is when death comes. And what I'm about to tell you about this Portuguese version of Vivian Maier will most likely happen to all of us, those of us who fame will never touch. So this whole story starts back in 2017. You see, back in the day, I used to roam around county fairs in search of negatives and images from deceased photographers, which are now being sold by unsuspecting sellers that just did a house clearance of the person who died. And this opens a lot of interesting possibilities because all of a sudden you start to see images that you're not expecting from the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. So one day I was visiting a county fair and I got attracted to a seller. He was selling lots and lots of photos. Anyway, I was checking the photos. I was thinking that they were quite alright, and I asked the seller if he had the negatives. And he turns to me and says, listen, you can have the negatives, 600 of them for 30 euros. And at first I was a bit hesitant, and then I said yes. So I left the photos because the photos were of not interest as long as I have the negatives. The value is on the negative and not on the photo itself. So after the fair, I went for a quick grab for something to eat. And I started to get really interested on them because there was something about them that was telling me that this was something out of the ordinary. So this whole story starts with a wedding. And the lifespan of these negatives is from the later part of the 1940s till the beginning of the 1960s, where it ends abruptly. So these were times that in Portugal we lived in a dictatorship. And this was a family with some money, some wealth, because they got married in France. I think it was in Paris, but I'm not sure. But it was definitely in France. So they had money to travel. Now, I'm not very sure, but one of the persons that got married was from a very poor family, and the other one was from a very rich family. Do notice that the person who is taking the photographs is always in the background, so I'm not sure of who he is. I know that it's a man because on one of those photos there is a mirror and the mirror shows me a man, but I'm never sure who he is. Out of those initial images that I've seen, this is the one that stands out. This is the fiancé, and it was taken as a slide, so it's a positive image. And us that sometimes do work with slides, we know how difficult it is to get the exposure completely correct. And he got it, and he made this lovely portrait of the bride-to-be. Speaking of portraits, here's one from the later years of the 1940s. And I know this because the film was produced in the 1940s and never went to the 1950s, 60s and forwards. And this seems to be one of the girlfriends that he had back then. And this lady only appears in 2 shots. But notice one thing. Notice his shadow. He is taking this image with the camera close to his belly, close to his hip. We all know who used to use this kind of cameras. He's using a TLR camera, the twin lens reflex, a camera that was very well known in the hands of Vivian Maier. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see better, but do notice the swirly bouquet in the out of focus areas that actually made this very difficult for me to see which camera it is, because I don't remember a TLR being able to do this subtle swirly bouquet. Now, this is just me supposing things, but I'm very sure that I'm very right about the TLR. The alternatives would be a Mamiya and would be the Hasselblad, but he is an administrative on a company that I'm going to show you in a while, so he would not have the money to buy any of these brands. Another thing that I became aware of was that he was able to move himself in several cultural and different environments. So he had the ability to travel, and he had the ability to go in places that a normal Portuguese would not be able to. For instance, you probably don't recognize this place, but I immediately saw what it was. This is the house of Juliet. Yes, the Juliet from Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. And now you know that she also has a Fiat, and for some reason on the back of the Fiat there's the name Grundig. And do you remember that couple that got married? Here's them buying fish directly to the fisherman. But let me show you what this man can do with a camera. Even today with a digital camera, it's very hard to photograph cobwebs. But he, in the 50s, with a TLR, was able to do it in the perfection. This was actually the very first negative that I picked up and saw for the first time when I bought those 600. The families are very much intertwined with the photographer. I didn't yet discover the reality behind all this. All I do know is that these two belong to two different families, and that both families were photographed throughout the decade of 1950 and the beginning of the 1960s. I also did notice while I was preparing the images for this video that the poor family was not present in the wedding that took place in France. There's only there the rich family, so the family that had the money to travel, and most likely the other guys just couldn't afford it. However, during the decade of the 1950s, they were photographed on several occasions where the newlyweds were always there. So it's very, very hard to say who belongs to which family because they're always there, either in the foreground or in the background. And this is one of the parties in the poor family. And you can see immediately by the way they are dressed and by the way that they look that they are tops medium lower class. And this is one of those photos that you can see the photographer in the back. And here you can clearly see a TLR. He's holding it with his left hand. And on the right hand, he has a flash gun. So we know that he's a short, stubby little fellow, but nothing more than that. And you can see by the way they pose and what they dress that this is a family that went through some hardships. Now, on the other side of the family spectrum, you have the rich family, and you can immediately see the things that they have that set them apart from the other ones. A good example of this is these two shots that show the family having fun while doing a shooting contest. And there are images of them goofing around and having small parties, but do notice one thing. In the later part of the 50s, they had a radio, which was quite standard for a Portuguese family to have, but they also had a TV. And at least on my case, my parents only had it in the 70s. In the 50s, this was a synonym of money. For example, here you can see them on a hotel room, and here they are probably downstairs having a quick bite in New York. Nothing to do with Lisbon, Portugal. And this guy did a fair bit of travel. He went around, but really around. I have photos of him figuring with the Pope, and I have photos of him in France and New York, Austria, Italy as well. Italy being Verona and Venice. But the two things that stand out is New York and France. And on most of the places I cannot directly pinpoint when he was there, but in New York I can, because on one of the shots There is a cinema there, and on a cinema there is a movie, and I can check and see that on 1958 this movie was in theaters across America. So I know that he was there in 1958 in New York. I do not know how come he traveled so much, because in Portugal we were living a dictatorship where all the frontiers were completely blocked. But the photographs that he took are absolutely staggering. Just have a look at the perfect composition of these next two shots. At a certain stage of his trip, the camera started to have advancement issues and started to overlap images. But even so, the art created is so gorgeous that I wish I could do the same with my images. And look at this lovers couple with the Notre Dame of Paris in the back. And look at the perfect timing of this stolen kiss in the Siena River. And going back to my poor old 1950s, 1960s Portugal, have a look at this perfectly framed image of the hardships of fishing. And also admire the portrait of the boss, to the person that we call the patron of the boat, which is actually the owner of the boat. As I said before, I know very little about the photographer, but this does not mean that I don't have info on him. We know that he used TLRs, we know that he is the man because we've seen him on the mirror, and I also know that he worked for a multinational called Avery, which was a British company that went bankrupt in the 2000s, but they used to do scales for drugstores. So I do have lots of images from the employees and from the store itself. And when I mean lots of images, it's like 100, 200 of them. But there is one time that it really gets my attention, which is the Christmas dinner of 1956. How do I know this date? I know it because there is one image with the date on being advertised in the front of the store. So I know also that there was a photographic contest then. I don't know the final outcome of this. I do know that he was photographing the staff members and he took this brilliant, very controversial, even today, photograph that just made me laugh. Look at the ladies just in front of the scales. And what does this tell you? I find this to be very, very witty. Now, this next image, in a way, would make sense to present it on the previous chapter, The Photographer. But the truth is, I am not really sure about it. The image shows a diligent staff member of Avery working in his normal office. But it also shows the camera in the back. And the camera, it's not a TLR, it's an SLR or a rangefinder. So I'm not sure that this is him, the photographer. That's why I kept it out of the photographer topic. And the last rolls reveal a baby being born. The baby is coming from that couple that got married, and this is prior to 1962. And I know this because there is this image, and this is what it looks like today. And if you see one image and the other one, you see that the bridge was still not built. And the bridge was done in 1962. So I know that the baby was born between 1958 and 1962 and most likely is still alive today. So sadly and regrettably, this is where it all ends. I have no more images after this. And I also take the opportunity to ask you, if you like this video, to like and subscribe. I will keep on doing this. Many thanks, or as we say in Portuguese, até a próxima.